On behalf of Dean Nicole Hill, I'd like to welcome you all to Shippensburg's one and only Little Red Schoolhouse. So this schoolhouse was built in 1865. It was known as the Mount Jackson or Potato Point School. There are still folks around who went to this school. In fact, Dean Hill and I went and met one of them a couple of months ago and actually got, thanks to our friends at the foundation, a original map case. So this map case came from a different school, but if you look back in the back there, you'll see down back in the corner we have an original map case from this school that we picked up from a friend of the Little Red Schoolhouse who went here. We obviously, Little Red Schoolhouse and One Red Schoolhouses have a long history of association here with the Cumberland Valley Normal School. Many of the students folks who went to this school would have gone to Shippensburg University, and many of our graduates back in normal school days would have taught in this institution. So we have a long history. The school was moved here in the late 1960s, just ahead of the 100th anniversary of Shippensburg University. And so we think it's only proper that as we enter into our 150th year, that we take a look back at the one-room schoolhouse, get it back into fighting shape, and then as a partnership between the Teachers Ed Department and the History Department, as well as the College of Arts and Sciences and the College of Education and Human Services, we launch into a whole new chapter of the Little Red Schoolhouse's history. We're super excited. Our friends at the foundation, our friends in the provost's office and in the administration have really gotten behind us in our initiative here. We have a lot of great things planned. And the first thing, of course, that we had here is Dr. Volke, the director of the Fashion Archives and Museum, inaugurated our new framework for the Little Red Schoolhouse in bringing together our Teachers Ed students, undergraduate public history, graduate Masters in Applied History, and Curriculum and Instruction students in our very first class here at the Little Red Schoolhouse, which is where you are right now. So with that, and without further ado, I will turn things over to Dr. Volke.
Alright, well, one of the things, the teacher rang the bell to indicate class was in session, so now class is in session, and you've already found out that we're practicing 19th century rules, where we have separated the men and the women, which is what would have happened in a normal classroom. What my students and I have been exploring this summer class is creating programming to be offered to visiting school groups coming to the schoolhouse for historical experiences that do align with the standards, the PA standards, and the Common Core goals. And one thing we discovered as we explored program offerings in other one-room schoolhouses is that already what we have planned is unique. Since the schoolhouse operated from 1865 to 1954, I gave them the task of selecting one time period that the schoolhouse was in operation and to create educational programming that corresponds to a time period of the school. The programs that the students designed contain pre-classroom activities to prep the students, then an actual day in the schoolhouse, and then post wrap-up activities back in their home classroom. So this is what my students are going to present to you today. So they're going to have to describe quickly the pre and post activities, but they're going to take you through in a truncated format some of the actual activities that students would be engaged in when they come to visit the schoolhouse. This way, the programming that we're creating can work for multiple grade levels and multiple historical perspectives, both international, national, and local, depending on the needs of the curriculum. So we have 3 presentations for you today, and the students have chosen the 1870s, World War I, and 1950s. So we will go in order, and we will start with the 1870s.
Because we have limited resources today, so I would say you guys have to share. Yeah, we
My name is Gennaro.
I'm Alex. I'm one of the graduate assistants here at Shippensburg University.
I'm Jen. So our group decided to do we started like the 1870s, but we're also starting off a bit into the early 60s to segue into our decade. And it sort of started off with my section. I did the geographic, and what I did with that is I worked with the Transcontinental Railroad. And the Transcontinental Railroad goes back, even back to the 1840s, when sort of the idea of this was being started, and everyone was kind of talking about it, even through the 1850s. I think it was like the Army engineers were kind of planning things out, but things never really moved through Congress because the northern representatives and the southern representatives, they both wanted any sort of transcontinental railroad activity to happen through their geographic areas. So once the Civil War started and the southern states seceded, it gave the Union, the states that remained in the Union, the ability to decide what they want to do with it without southern interference. So that's why they chose the current, the path they chose, because the South wasn't there anymore to say, hey, we want some our area. So, they kind of do it themselves. So it starts off with the Civil War, and it goes up to the contested election, Keith's area. So if you guys look in your folders, on the left side it's going to be our programming itself, and on the right side it's going to be sort of like our on-hand materials that the students would see and the teachers would use to look through students. So you guys want to look through those as we're speaking. So the way my section is going to be going, if you're looking at the maps, like the tools we have there. So the way my section would be starting off would be looking at this map, and sort of the teacher would say, what is it you notice about the map? And the main point I want students to see is the mountain areas. And with that, the teacher is going to talk about how the Pacific Railroad Company and pretty much the railroad companies would have to blast through like these mountains to work their way through. So I want the students to see these mountain ranges, how long they are, how big they are, and to kind of imagine that it wasn't like an easy process. They had to blast through these mountains, and it was a bit of a process because they used to have to drill like an inch and 3/4 holes into the mountain's base, filled with gunpowder, and blast it, and an entire day's worth of work could get them through 6 to 12 inches of progress. And that only changed up to 3 feet of progress once they added like nitroglycerin instead of gunpowder, and it sort of blasted better, so it gave them more space, so it worked faster. But the main point I want people to understand, and the students understand, is that this was a long, arduous process. And we don't think of it as much today because it was something from the past, it's just there, but it's like an entire process. And what else they're gonna talk about? The next, if you guys flip that page, you'll see like the next map. It's gonna sort of be the finished railroad map for the U.S., or at least up to Centennial. And what they're going to be doing with that is sort of the teacher is going to mention and talk about the Transcontinental Railroad itself, and talk about the progress that was made since it was completed. All these railroads have been completed as well, and just map out the path of these Transcontinental Railroad for the students. And then if you turn that page again, you're going to see the New York Times article from May 11th, 1865, I believe. May 10th, 1865 is the celebration. They did kind of like a golden spike where they hit the spike to symbolically finish the Transcontinental Railroad. And on May 11th, the New York Times reported on it. And the main takeaway from this part, because our section as a whole is talking about national identity and the evolution of the national identity, and how from the 1970s, from the Civil War, from the beginning of the 1860s to the 1970s, how our national identity is kind of forming, it's evolving, it's changing. So with that New York Times article, it's going to talk main section. It's a little hard to see because this one that you guys have is smaller, way smaller print than I saw on the computer. But it's going to say, this project is connecting the Pacific coast with the Atlantic coast, and it's uniting the nation as one. And it's sort of going into that aspect of what is our national identity, how are we evolving. The Civil War reunited the South with the rest of the nation, and now the Pacific, the Transcontinental Railroad united the Pacific with the Atlantic coast, and sort of commerce and everything kind of exploded after that, and really kind of like made the nation one, instead of just like the East Coast and the West Coast and sort of South and
So my section is going to be talking about Reconstruction, more specifically the Reconstruction Amendments. For those of you that don't know, I can give you a quick refresher. The Reconstruction Amendments were the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments of the United States Constitution. They were passed more or less right in the end of the Civil War, right until the end of Reconstruction in 1877. And my section is really going to try and really hone in on Reconstruction and talk about how our national identity is transforming in Reconstruction, because the entire idea of who can be an American is completely shifting in this time. With the inclusion of the 13th and 14th Amendments, you have the abolition of slavery and also the Equal Protections Amendment, which drastically changes the scope of the Constitution and citizenship itself. So I really wanted the teacher or whomever is doing the program to really dig into this idea that the United States can be for everyone. In this section of American history, we're finally starting to see the idea that we can finally start to fill those ideals of all men are created equal. Of course, now we have to have certain caveats to that, but you kind of see an evolution of our national identity in that way. So one of the activities that I had in the packet, if you turn, I believe it's going to be a representation of a 1965 Alabama literacy test. Now, I know it's not the era in which we are covering, but I'm using it kind of as an example of the type of barriers that African Americans had to face after the creation of the 15th Amendment. There were certain barriers that many states created in order to prevent African Americans from voting. Specifically, African American men, we have to be very clear that it's men, because women don't get universal suffrage until at least a half a century later. So we kind of have to create that caveat. So the literacy test is one of the activities that I want the students to complete, because I wanted to demonstrate one of the barriers that's actually there. You guys don't have to do it specifically right now. It was a test bank of about 68 questions. I knocked it down to about 5. The standard practice was about you get 30 questions, and you would have 10 minutes to complete it. And that would be it. The person that was in charge of the polling place, they would give you this literacy test, and they would say you have 10 minutes, starting now, and if you didn't complete it, well, that's too bad. That's it. And further, going even a step further, after the activity was finished, because I would only give you guys 1 minute, I kind of wanted to give you guys kind of a sense of urgency with the test. After the test was done, we would survey the room and we would go over the answers. Now, of course, I actually made it 3 easy questions and 2 hard, but the test was purposely made to be incredibly difficult. It was meant to be almost impossible to complete, especially if you didn't have any type of higher formal education. And so we would survey the room, and we'd go over the test, and we would say, okay, how many got this right? And then at the end of the test, even if you got 100%, we would have to tell the students, hey, it doesn't matter what score you got on the test. You still wouldn't vote. You still couldn't. The person that would be sitting there saying, well, no, it looks a little too busy to me. Maybe you should come back another time. Or maybe I have a poll tax to pay that you have to pay. Or, like many other states had, grandfather clauses, which essentially suggested that if your grandfather or your grandfather was enslaved, you therefore would not be able to vote either. So I really wanted to kind of delve into the beginning of Jim Crow and the idea that even though our national identity is trying desperately to face equality in so many different areas, we're still taking steps backwards. And then finally in closing, there was a second activity which I wanted to help transition into Jeff's section. we really wanted to talk about moniker, like images of national identity. When you think of the United States, what do you think of? Like what? Here, I'll survey the room really quickly. What do you guys think when someone says America to you? What's the first thing that you picture?
Statue of Liberty.
Thank you, because that's exactly where I was going. And the Statue of Liberty is almost a universal symbol of what it means to be an American. At least in some respect. Obviously, you can ask anybody and their answer about their identity will be different. But that's kind of the conversation that we want to start, is that all our identities are different. We're all connected in some way, but we also hold all of our individuality. So I wanted to take that Statue of Liberty idea and kind of run with it. So the final activity would be really short. Basically, I would ask the student, I would give a brief overview of the history of the Statue of Liberty, because the Statue of Liberty was gifted to us by France. France thought it might be best for us to celebrate democracy, so they wanted to give us a symbol of everlasting friendship, of the idea that democracy will never die, that it will be everlasting. So they started in 1875. Now, the Centennial was in 1876, and so you can kind of see where they needed to hurry up a little bit. But they didn't actually finish, we didn't actually complete the statue, and it wasn't open to the public until 1886. Now, of course, we're saying, well, they're a couple of years too late. Well, yes. So what we're going to do is the next section we're going to talk about is the 1876 World's Fair, the Centennial Exhibition that was held in Philadelphia. And there was actually a part of the Statue of Liberty that France had actually sent to us. And so I would survey the room and ask, okay, what part of the Statue of Liberty do you guys think was actually on display? You can shout out if you want. Doesn't
Torch.
Yes, and it was a torch, actually. And so in the packet, I believe, the first image next will be actually the Statue of Liberty that was on display. And visitors could actually go and see the torch for itself. Now, it wouldn't actually be the green color we know it today, because since it's copper, it hadn't oxidized yet, so it was much more of like a bronze type of color. So actually, a lot of the times when, I've seen this actually in my own experience, that when students see the Statue of Liberty in this kind of brownish bronze color, they're like, oh, well, this isn't the real Statue of Liberty. Well, it is. It's just that you have to explain that the copper had oxidized. That's how it became the green color. And so you can actually use the Statue of Liberty as kind of a marker of, as it's changing, our national identity is also changing. Is that it's constantly morphing, right? And we wanted to kind of keep that national identity centrally focused when we talk about the Centennial. So Jeff, if you could take it away.
All right, whose birthday is it today? No. I thought maybe I'd get news. All right, how about whose birthday is in either July or August? We got the sole winner. Happy birthday! Did you report it? Everyone? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear. What's up? Happy birthday to you. Little short on the tail end there, but what day is it? August 8th. Congratulations. I'm a Leo, obviously. Well, pretend that you did not hear a little bit of the end part of Alex, and this is how I'd start off, and I'd see if there's any birthdays in the room, have fun with that, but I'd transition into, all right, there's a birthday that we're going to learn about and celebrate, and it happens in 1876, and unlike one day birthday, this birthday lasted almost 7 months, and over 8.2 million visitors wanted to come to celebrate this birthday. Pretty spectacular event. What birthday is it?
100th anniversary.
What's that?
100th anniversary.
The 100th anniversary. We call that the Centennial celebration. So we got a lot of people flooded into. Does anybody know the city that they come to celebrate the 100th? Philadelphia. Why is that such a cool place to do it in? I don't know who said it.
Declaration of Independence was
Very good. Declaration and the Constitution a little bit later. So what a neat experience these people would have had to go back
back to Philadelphia to see this celebration take place over America's 100th birthday. So when we talked about doing the 1870s, immediately I was like, man, this would be such a cool event. And it's still pretty close by. So even though our program focuses more on a larger national topic, kids in school would have been obviously talking about this World Expo, this fair that was coming to the United States and to Philadelphia, which was not too far away. And it's a spectacular event. Like I said, almost 7 months of celebration. Countries from across the world are coming to share their unique things on exhibit. And buildings were basically built and made to celebrate this event. So when we talked about doing a celebration event with the Centennial, one of the cool things that we thought about was, as we're looking at all these pictures, all these primary sources, which that pre-activity would have been hopefully talking about primary sources so they know what they're talking about, the students. You start to see all these images over and over and over. And it's spectacular looking. I mean, you see all these different things from stuffed animals to new inventions to, root beer being sold and ketchup and Heinz company coming to share off their products. And so it's an incredible event where people would come to see. And so as we thought about this topic, we thought, well, all this stuff that's happening, we really thought about doing this national identity question. And it's a very interesting question because, as Alex had mentioned, this could be, this is not a short answer. This is something that students are going to struggle with, and depending on where they come from, it's going to be a hard question to answer. What is the national identity? And then we wanted to connect that question to today, and how does our national identity look today from back then, and how can we even continue to improve what that kind of idea even means. And so if you look in that packet, the first activity that the teacher would start off with is a primary source folder, where there's a whole bunch of these photos that I just mentioned. If you want to skip through some of them, take note, look at them, analyze them. This would be a picture analysis at the beginning part of this. And so you would go through, it would be done with a partner or a pair or group. I mean, you can do it however you want if you're the teacher, but my vision was to do this with a group of students. And after you flip through those pages, at the back there's the worksheet that would go along with that. And the worksheet splits it up into three kind of bigger questions to ask. The first one is observation, so the students would just observe all the things that they're seeing in those pictures, whatever it might be, if they think it's important or not. And so the conversation hopefully would get to all the different products and things that were being sold, and even advertisements that you'd see as you flip through those pictures. The next box is the reflect box. And the question in there is basically talking about if you were going back and a child in the 1870s and you were going to the expo with your family and you were going to walk around the Fairmont grounds, what are some of the categorical items that you would see? And so as you would be flipping through those, what might you see? I'm going to ask you guys, what did you see in some of those pictures as you flip through? Sorry that some of you don't have the packet.
We need some answers from that.
Do you guys? You guys can kind of share this.
Start this part.
You are a teacher, look at that. To the right page.
So this all starts.
Yes.
These are all.
All right, any categories? What might you be seeing on display or being sold to the public?
Inventions?
Inventions. What types did you find in there? Any kind of
Fertilizer?
Yeah. Did you recognize what kind of fertilizer? Buffalo fertilizer. Supposedly the best fertilizer you can buy for your plants and crops. There was actually a giant agricultural horticultural building that was built to display all these different agricultural products and inventions. So fertilizer is a great one. Anybody else? Speak up, boy.
The Gatling gun.
The Gatling gun, right. You're going to see weapons and inventions and things that are coming up through this time period. I mean, again, we're coming right off of the American Civil War. We've We've got a lot of inventions coming out. So the Gatling gun is one of those things that have been developed or started to develop, and now it's becoming more popular, especially in this time period as we're now seeing that westward expansion and a lot of things that are using those types of weaponry out west. So you'd be seeing weapons, you'd be seeing different types of inventions in warfare. Very good. What else?
Fireproof safe.
Fireproof safe. That's one of my favorites. It got cut off a little bit, but at the very beginning, it's the robbers and they're breaking into a normal safe, and then the safe that's advertised, they're at the safe, like they can't crack it. The next one, it's like burning in a pit and it's not being destroyed. And then finally at the end, they're like carrying it to the expo. So yeah, safe technology in safes. What else? I put a lot of pictures in there. What about the cartoons that you saw at the very end? Did anyone see those cartoons? Those literally made me laugh when I saw those.
The Centennial wedding.
Yeah, national propaganda. Can you describe the one that you saw there? Or the two, I think there's two in there.
Yeah, Uncle Sam straddling two dates, right?
Yeah, it's called The Long Stride, right? You see Uncle Sam, and they're basically connecting this era of the birth of the nation to what they are then, 100-year celebration. And look at all the progress that the United States has made. Look at all these things that we've done. What about the other one with George Washington, right? What is he doing there? What does he say?
Blessing.
Blessings to his what? Children. And who are his children? It's a really funky looking cartoon. I heard someone say it over here. Lady Liberty, and then Uncle Sam. And they're opening up, it looks like one of the buildings at the expo, pulling out jewels and gems and all these great things that are on display. And so, after seeing all these images, after the students would talk about their observations, after the students would reflect on what they might see at the expo, that last and final question is really the meat of what we want to get to, and that would be, what would you say at that time period, what was most important to their society, to this U.S. society at their 100th anniversary? There's no right or wrong answer here, but there's certainly a theme. What is the majority of these people thinking about themselves? As a teacher, the silence, you should not be scared. Is that what you're thinking?
Pride?
Pride, very good. Pride in the country for specifically what? Because pride can come in many forms, right? But what is specifically are they proud about?
Accomplishments?
Accomplishments, innovation. You get the sense of we're the best in the world, right? We've got all these things. We're up and coming. We've only started 100 years ago, and look where we're at today. And so this idea is kind of an interesting one to start to explore. And so when we transition this to the next activity, you see at the bottom of the worksheet that they're filling out, there's a time capsule box. And this could be done during the day. If you wanted to make it really easy, you could just do it on slips of paper and give it to the teacher and you could share. Or you could make this into more of a homework assignment where they would have to go home and bring something to class for this time capsule activity. And so the idea would be you're transitioning to ask, okay, so now we've talked about what national identity meant to some of these people in the 1876 celebration, Centennial celebration. Let's think about what our national identity is today, and how do we think about it maybe similar or different, compare and contrast the two. And so this time capsule activity would have them think, okay, what do we value today as a society? What are some things that if 100 years from now, a class was opening up your time capsule from this class period, and they were looking at these pictures as we're looking at these pictures from back in 1876, what would they start to see? Now, you can kind of imagine what might be put in there, but some things might be similar, right? A lot of technology perhaps, a lot of innovation, but maybe we would start to see other things too, celebrating different aspects of society that maybe wasn't as celebrated. You know, Alex talked about the Reconstruction era, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. I'm sure there'd be more thought on social issues rather than just innovation and technology. So the idea would be to start transitioning to see what is our identity today, and then what do we want even the future generations to think about our national identity. And so we've got all these great and celebratory things. We've got the Transcontinental Railroad being completed, connecting the nation. I mean, the Civil War's over. They're trying to reconstruct or bring together this country through what Alex was talking about. We've got this incredible celebration, and then it all goes downhill. It's all like going up, and all of a sudden.
Well, that was an entrance to say the least. Hi, my name is Keith. I'll be talking about the contested election of 1876. Now, you've heard a lot of great things of how our national identity started to rise. Unfortunately, this election actually bruised our national identity, and we'll be talking about that through the compromise of 1877. So, the program I based off of is, I started with the candidates. So we all know we have the Republican and Democrat parties. There were actually 3 others. I only included the one that actually got 1% of the vote because everyone else kind of fell flat on their face and one withdrew. So the Greenback Party is actually an interesting little concept in itself. It started in Indianapolis in Indiana. So their whole part was to bring in the agricultural industry, but they had a minor fault with that plan. Now that plan was, they wanted to raise the deficit. They wanted to inflate things, which as we all know, that doesn't work too well, especially for individuals or the lower class folk, if you will. So unfortunately, their platform didn't take off at all. And then we get to the actual candidacy and the election. Now, it was a contested election because of 3 main reasons. One reason, and there were 3 states. So we have Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina. The weird thing about it was each party, which the main 2 parties, the Republican and Democrats, claimed victory. So it caused a lot of contention throughout the United States. And because of that, President Grant actually put into effect a contingency in case this ever happened, which they would have representation from the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court justices to help find the winner within it all. So that's where the plan goes to, and we talk a little bit about how things happen in that aspect. And then we get to the all-important compromise of 1877. So we already talked about how there were 15 representatives from the 3 major parties, the House, the Senate, as well as the justices. And this is where it becomes a black mark in our national identity. For all the progress that we made with the 13, 14, 15 amendments is going to go right back to the way it was. So while they were convening and trying to find the winner of this presidential election, there was a backroom meeting with Hayes, President Hayes elect to be. And in order to win the presidency, he made a deal. And that deal consisted of 5 things that the Democrats and the lower southern individuals wanted. And if you actually turn to, it'll actually be on the last page of our lesson. There are 2 main ones that I really want to talk about, which will be the first and the 5th. Now, the first one is withdrawal from armed forces out of the South. Throughout that time, those forces were there to enforce these amendment rights, to make sure that no one was taking advantage of the enslaved who were free. Okay? So they took away the tip of the sword, if you will, to allow things to start moving right back to how it was. Then we're going to talk about the 5th. The 5th one is where it truly gets down and out. It's stated that the southern states wanted control of how they would treat African Americans again. Now, why I bring this up is because later on, they found and tweaked, with beautiful words, ways to enact slavery again. But it wasn't slavery. They called it a program for trade. So, children were getting kidnapped again to work on the plantations under this guise of learning a trade. After bringing this all back around, my activity is then to start asking the group, the children, and everything like that, the relevance of things. From then to our elections now and everything that's happening in the world, how have we changed? Do we still see the issues and ideologies that we had way back then? And it's a critical thinking and group discussion to bring up the last portion of it. So, thank you.
And just in final closing, sorry to rain on your clapping period, sorry. I'm sure you guys can applaud very soon. Just in closing, kind of to kind of wrap it all up, we really wanted to have a very reflective ending to this program. Because it's grappling with so many big picture ideas, this is something that's just not going to be a one-day lesson where as soon as the students leave the door, they won't think about it. Identity is a part of ourselves. It's something that we either consciously or subconsciously think about every day. We identify in hundreds of different ways. It could be anything from what we were talking about, something like geography, something like politics, something like religion, language. There are so many different aspects to our identity that we often don't even recognize completely. And so I really wanted to stress, at least to the students that would be in the program, to look at yourselves and examine who you are. Because a question of who you are is an incredibly self-reflective question. It's something that's incredibly deep. It requires very critical aspects of the way in which you identify. And if you are able to identify yourself, then you can better understand how you fit into the world. And really what we're trying to do, even as Americans, we're all still trying to figure out where we fit. Our national identity, especially over the last couple of years especially, we've been trying to grapple with who we are, our history, our conventions, our social construction. We're always asking these questions. And it's very indicative of our students to ask those same questions. They have to ask themselves, who am I? Who am I a part of? And is the United States a place where we can all come together? And so these questions often are incredibly deep. They require reflection. They require communication, not just with yourself, but with your parents, with your friends, with your peers, your colleagues. It's a very, very deep aspect of our culture that we wanted to address in this program. So thank you very much for listening, and if you guys have any questions, we're happy to answer any of them. Thank you very much.
There's no question. World War I will now take place.
So, as you guys, I know that you're on some time. Thank you so much for thanks for joining us. Welcome to the thank you so much for the inaugural event of the Little Red Schoolhouse. So there will be many more. So thank you.
Sorry if I missed your presentation. Try to take care of it. Thank you.
Yeah, we have our first, we're a group of 4, however, the 4th one is on Zoom. So she's going to be kind of the first person to be presenting and stuff, so we're going to try to figure out a way to enable her to talk to you guys as we're up here. So.
We'll turn the computer and put it on top of the slate so that she can turn on her camera.
Oh, do you want to, okay. Jen, if you can hear us. Yeah, she's good. There she is. I don't know, do I unmute you and then, or her, sorry, and then mute her. Yeah. Oh, here we go, yeah. Yeah, we can hear her. I think that's a yes. Okay, thank you for.
Can everybody, it might have to be.
World War I, 1910s. And so that the teachers can use to either show the students or to use just for information for themselves. But it talks about a day in a Walker Schoolhouse. So they will talk about, all right, tomorrow or this week we're going to go to Walker Schoolhouse in Shippensburg. These are some of the expectations we have. You're going to sit one on one side, one on the other. Girls, if you want to wear dresses so that it's appropriate to the time, do it. Things like that. So we're just talking about expectations throughout the day. So students understand what is expected of them when they walk into the classroom. It also has just a quick blurb about our homefront efforts and what was done within the classroom to help with homefront, just to help prepare them for what they might encounter when we start our program for the next school year or a week. And so our whole rationale for this pre-visit is that we want teachers to provide students with support background information. You can't go into this program without the appropriate background information. And for these upper level grades, we even want to take them just a little bit further, and we want teachers to assign students an identity. And we want students to think about how their life, their location, their family background, their country descent, their arrival to the country, how that would impact their school day, and how it would impact their view of the war. And when we created these identities, we looked at demographics of Cumberland County in the early 1900s, and we looked at the population, we looked at the diversity, and we kind of created these identities based off of who was living in Cumberland County. So it's a little more relevant to this local region. And we're going to talk about, in the post-visit, how did their identities impact their school day, and we will go more how they participated in class.
Alright, sorry, thank you, Jenna.
Alright, so.
We got unmute.
We're gonna,
Yes.
sorry, thanks, sorry, I thought I had you or had us unmute before, but yeah, thank you. Alright, so I guess with that, just like Jenna was saying here, I think she's everything now, okay. So our whole goal here is to try to, kind of give you an idea from the pre-visit, identity, so that when you come to the schoolhouse, we're going to kind of give you like a life in the schoolhouse around this time period, around 1914, when we are, trying to help the Allies and all that kind of stuff. So the first thing though that we're going to do is not really focus as much on the World War I aspect, but we're going to do how life was like immediately when you just come into a schoolhouse here. So the first thing would be, of course, separating you guys. You're already separated, and we talk about like how you come in, you have to stand up and curtsy or bow like to your teacher, those kind of things first off. And then we would give you readers of what kind of lessons we would talk about in the beginning of the school day. So we're going to pass those around, and you guys can take a look here, cruise through, but the first thing would be a reading lesson. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit, maybe just a minute or two to kind of look through, but within this, we have the primer, the beginning reader up to book 7 within these sections of our pamphlet that we're handing out here. And so what I'd like you to do is while you're taking a look at this, just look at kind of the advancements for each of the books, different levels. You can see the changes within them from the beginning primer to, all the way to book 7, how it's way more advanced as far as chapters and the way you're reading and that kind of stuff. And so if we were to have students here, we're not going to do this with you guys obviously, but if we had students here, we would talk to them about maybe their identities that they were given as the school children. Does some of the sections, levels that they're at, do they relate to what their identity is as a school, as a child? And also, we could compare maybe with them what they learned in school today versus what they were learning at that time. And so that's our first little section that we would do with them. So just cruise through And then we will go into our next little section of a math lesson here in a moment.
Just while you're perusing, these are taken, remember that the schoolhouse comes equipped with a large library of original textbooks going back to the 1810s.
Yeah, so this is actual, what they were looking at the time, sorry, I didn't mention that. So everything that you're learning right now is from that.
They're just stored separately right now, and we're really just going to get one on.
Okay. So that would be the reading section. Then, as in the schoolhouse, you have one group of people, or students, and one teacher teaching everything like you would see in an elementary classroom. But what we would do is then we would switch to another subject, and then this next subject would be the math. And so the packets you guys have are also,
Yeah, if you flip past the last primer, you should see that there is a section labeled arithmetic. So we're going to go to that section and possibly test your math skills. And then we'll finish up with the spelling section, but right now we're going to turn to the arithmetic one. So yeah, you can test our math.
So as you guys imagine, I'm not a math major, so don't worry. Ideally, the whole point with this isn't to actually teach students math and grade them and see if they got it right or wrong, but it's more or less so they can see what kind of math is actually being done, how it looks like, and once again, how does that compare to what their math class that they are skipping because of the future, what their math class actually has. And so I picked out myself a few pages just so we could look at the compare. And you can give some of these math problems a little quick try. The first one, we're going to start from the hardest, so that'll be book level 3. And if you go to the pages that are marked page 36, it's going to look a little bit like
36?
Yeah, 36. So look just like this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We're good.
First part of the math lesson.
And so, one of the things this book goes into detail is what everything you could ever want to know about percent. Why we even say it that way? Why is it percent? It goes into ridiculous detail. And then it goes into some practice problems. And one of the things these books really stress is more real life problems. Like this particular math book, in later chapters, it talks about investing, about paying your taxes, about banking, life insurance, construction, everything a fifth grader needs to know to survive in the real world. So the questions I'm looking at are the ones on the first on the column right here where it says first important problems. And these are actually meant to be given out orally, and you can tell that where it says all work oral. So I would just stand here and call so-and-so, stand up, tell me, in a school of 200 pupils, 9% were in the 7th grade. How many pupils were in that grade? And of course, you have to answer it, if not face the humiliating consequences, because back then, teachers weren't as nice as I am to my students. So if you want to
stand up, go ahead, he's calling on it.
We have volunteers? No, I'll be a 21st century teacher for this.
Put your calculator away, Ken.
Right. So, and we've got that paper out there in case you really want to try to figure out one of these and see, how's my math today?
Yeah.
Mental arithmetic. Yeah, keep it in mind, these were oral problems for this problem. All right, and so another page.
No one has answered the problem.
Oh, that's 18.
Yes.
Yes, that would be correct. Now I have to double check to make sure I didn't say it correct. I'll trust you. I'm pretty sure most of you are better at math than I am. Just the way it is. Book number 2 is also about percentages, the section I picked. So if you flip over once, or if you flip the page over once, it says page 165. And then you flip it again. On the left, it says page 166. And once again, this time this is something perhaps while the teachers orally testing the kids who have goal 3, the kids who have goal 2 can then just work on these problems. They'll pick a few of these problems and they'll figure it out. Question number 1 on this one is the school has 284 pupils and 50% of them are girls. So figure out how many of them are girls. And so that's kind of the experience I would give. So I don't know if you guys want to try that one out as well.
Which number?
Number 1, the very first one where it says using what you learned.
142.
Yeah, 166 is the page over there. So if you need, I can help you find the page. Yeah.
I did hear the answer.
Oh, you heard the answer. Yeah. That's what I thought. Is what you say? Or 142 is what you said.
142.
Yeah.
Yeah, just divide it by 2, right?
Congratulations.
Yes, that's it. Okay. So, what we got then, those are the kind of work. And then there's also an example for lower grades. This time what you got to do is flip it over, and you'll see an image of kids in front of a blackboard. Now, in this one, they're not really doing percentages that much as they're presenting a little game, or at least they make it look like it's a game. You're really doing algebra, but it's find the missing number. And so this would be for the lower grades. And so what it does, it asks you, you have 4, and the answer is 9. What's the missing number? So 4 minus 9 is 5. And that's the example they give. And you would find that answer and you would write it down. And so really they're doing algebra, but it doesn't call it algebra, which is why I like this particular page, because it sneaks it in there. So that's what we would do with the math portion. And the problems there are more sample problems there if you want to take a look at them. But after that, we will slip into spelling. Now the thing about this book, it's not just a spelling book, it also serves like a vocabulary book. So it's not only are you doing spelling, they also want you to, handle with what the words mean, and why certain words are spelled the way they're spelled. Like, for example, plurals. It goes over the rule. How do you make words plural? When do words get an S versus an ES, or something like that? And if you look at the first page where it says, it will say spelling on the top, and if you look at it on your right on the bottom, you have a couple fill-in blanks, and it's asking you to copy the sentences and fill in the blanks, and then italics. It gives you the word bank that you're supposed to use, and that's kind of like the vocabulary part. And then, of course, for the word lists, that would be for more of a spelling bee kind of game. And you could even split the class to do boy versus girl, which would be of great interest for more, to high schoolers or middle schoolers coming in. And that would be essentially the spelling portion of this. Those are the little lessons that we would present as they would be presented in a one-room schoolhouse, roughly in the 1910s.
Alright, so as you can see, next, what would be happening is she's pumping up the organ, which is why you kind of see her feet moving back and forth.
It's a lot of noise, so I was trying to not be loud, but I'm a little loud here, so sorry.
So typically, in the school day, there would be a music class, usually towards the end of the school day. Usually because our group is fully comprised of teachers, and we know as teachers, basically after lunch, and Jeff, you can kind of help me with this too. After lunch, it's kind of hard to pull them back into doing more academic subjects. So usually music would kind of be towards the end of the day, once kids have had lunch, recess, and they get all the academics at the beginning when they're a little bit more focused. And then they save more of the fun stuff till the end. So, she is going to play one of the songs for us on the organ.
Yeah, don't expect much, guys, because
it is a very short song.
But it's multitasking. I've never done this before. It's actually
yeah, she gained a new skill playing the organ.
doing this.
So I am going to pass this around. It is the very top song. It's the one called Soldier. And she's gonna play it through by herself, and then the second time, if anybody wants to attempt to sing, I mean, you guys already sang happy birthday. So if you can sing for this group, we can sing for us. Yeah, you're gonna have a good calf workout. All right. So, like I said, it is the top song. It is the one called Soldiers.
Alright, we'll play it through.
So she'll play it once through.
Alright.
I will sing. Y'all sing.
Pretty easy. Pretty easy, I think. Okay? So, does everyone have it? I know, I'm sorry. I'll try to as long as I can, but we're gonna start. Okay, so 1, 2, 3.
After the whole singing, you know, the blood is flowing, kids are all excited, they're musical, then we can take them outside, you know, remind them that grass exists, and we'll go over a couple of games. Now, one of the things we wanted to focus on is trying to get games that, you know, kids could actually be playing in 1914 to 1920. We don't want to do the whole thing like, you know, what it would be like if somebody 1,000 years from now said, well, kids in the year 1990 used to play video games on their Xbox. We don't really want to do that kind of thing. So it does get a little hard, but we do have 3 games we can confirm, which would be marbles, hopscotch, and leapfrog. And these would be games that they would be playing in the early 1900s. And so we would go over those directions, spend some time, how to play the marbles work, hopscotch, and leapfrog. And I guess it would depend on the specific school whether or not they'd be allowed to play leapfrog. Some schools frown upon that, some don't. And we would also kind of remind them again, just like everybody would be seated separately by gender, everyone would play separately by gender as well. So you're not going to have boys and girls leapfrogging over each other. And so it's kind of harking back to that more authentic experience as much as possible. And then of course they'll have a chance to play that or just hang around and talk to each other.
Alright, and then after they're done having recess, of course, they're going to come back in, get in their seats. Hopefully they're a little bit tired, you know, from all the singing and the play and all that kind of stuff. But this is what we're going to focus on World War I a little bit more then. So we did like kind of the main kind of stuff that we would be, you know, having them complete the subjects and all. But now we're going to focus on the home front during World War I. Of course, this is 1914. We're not involved necessarily like full out in the war yet, but we are helping out our allied forces. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to have different stations. Like if this were an actual activity that we do with the students, we have different stations in the schoolhouse that would be part of some of the things that they would have done in the home front, like cooking, knitting, like rationing, and gardening. And so what we're going to have for you right now is just the cooking aspect here that Alexis is passing out. And we would also have propaganda. I don't think we mentioned that yet, but there would be propaganda throughout the classroom that kind of focuses in on, you know, some of the things that they would be trying to support, bring in that patriotism that, you know, at this time everyone was trying to focus on. And so as we'd be discussing that at first, we would then go into our different stations. So the one I'm going to do right now with you is going to be the cooking and rationing here. So I'm not going to get into it too terribly much. we would do a lot more activities with the students, but as you can see, this first one here that you'll look at is going to be the America's Food Pledge. That is a newspaper article talking about the purpose of rationing, why this is important for, for our allied, forces, why we should be helping out with this and doing our part within our country, even though we can't help overseas, we can help here to help them out overseas. So that's going to be the first section here. It also shows different recipes that you could do to use different resources here so that you can ration off for the other ingredients for the troops. And so it says how to make your old recipes fit in new conditions. This would be in the second section of the paper here. Interchangeable foods that you can use in replace of other things. And so when we do our station, we would kind of talk with the kids about different substitutes, how they could substitute different recipes and foods. And on the back here, if you go to the next section, you'll see some of the menus for a week. If you were rationing here, it's that served in the demonstration, what they were doing at the time here as well. And more recipes for the other section. And one thing I just wanted to note is on the back, the last section is just talking about during different gardening. And this is going to be more focused on in the gardening section, but it talks about some of the different crops that were grown at certain times of the year. And so we'd be focusing on that as well. If we were doing a station here, not only would we be looking at that, but we would also have them create a kind of a scenario. So a student task could be create a day or a week if we have time with them, worth of menu items based off their scenario and rations for the week. So the student identity, again, is played back into this too, where they would see maybe what kind of crops are they growing at their home or something, and how are they going to be influenced by those too. So it's pretty fun for them to kind of look into that and see that.
All right, so now on to my section then. This, maybe nobody's going to answer it, but how many people know how to knit? Crochet. Yeah, counts. Crocheting is more popular. So one of the things that we do provide in the lesson plan the teacher would have access to is suggested readings, one of which kind of goes into knitting in a little bit more detail. What I want to pass around right here is some common knitting patterns. These were actually found in a magazine from 1918, trying to get people to knit for the war effort. The one big thing is traditionally knitting was seen as more of a women's task. However, with that suggested teacher resource that hopefully the teacher would read for background, it helps to show that with helping for the war effort, it kind of helped get rid of the gender divide, especially with knitting. You would see men knit, you would see children of both genders knitting, old, young. Everybody was just trying to help with the war effort. So I'm going to pass these around. You can look at the different types of articles of clothing that would be knitted, one of which in the front was a vest, fingerless gloves, and then Dr. Volpe is going to help teach a couple of you guys how to knit. Not too much, you're not going to leave here with any scarves or sweaters. But you should hopefully know how to do some things.
But again, I got you all set up.
Who wants to try learning how to knit? I'll try.
Yeah, it's all set up in here.
We have many.
I will try it.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we're going to take up some people from the men's side.
Come on, men's side. You never know when you're in a pickle, but you need to knit something for yourself. You never know.
So ideally with this station, kids are not going to leave with scarves. We're hoping that they can maybe make a smaller washcloth that they can take home. But if the teacher gets into a little bit of the background, maybe then the teacher in the classroom, if the kid's interested, they can build on it.
Take the yarn off the needles, that was just for transport.
Yeah, so it doesn't slide off.
Yeah. There's two reduced tape. I've got 2 more sets of needles.
I'm going to suck it for
Okay. One of the rhymes that people use to teach children how to knit was in through the front door, once around the back, pop through the window, and off jumps Jack. So, this is an ancient rhyme, so what you do is, okay, if you notice, just to keep things organized, one needle has been rammed through, there's one needle with loops and one needle that was just rammed through the bottom. Take the one out, the one that was rammed through the bottom. Now, hold the needle with a little bit of knitting that I started you with, hold that one in your left hand.
Yes.
You hold that in your left.
So, and your right hand has the empty needle.
Yes.
Right? Now, so I'm going to come around and show you really quickly how it works. So, in through the front door, once around the back, up through the window.
Piece of cake, I'm done.
Got anything else?
Okay.
Spitballs next.
Grandma tried to teach me to knit, and I kept copying the stitches, and she got frustrated.
Around, through, up, in, look it through. See how I'm just catching it with, that's all it is, because I'm looping. Alright. So you can keep practicing for the rest of the presentation. Just in,
I don't want to start poking things.
No, it's okay. Once she comes around,
I'll do it.
don't ask me.
Do you hold it like this?
In the time and stuff? Yeah.
I have a stopwatch.
Yeah.
And then eventually, I've only ever knitted a scarf. I never got too intricate with my knitting, but I can make a mean scarf. Yeah, and I did this station when you were kids, and they would be all grouped together. They're only in English.
So you start here. This is the front door? Once around the back.
The
It's like math in public.
Yeah, hold it more like I am.
Honestly,
I don't know what to do. Where do
They can
you?
have a hand.
This is.
See?
She'll show you.
3 fingers at the bottom, index and thumb. It's the index and thumb that are actually really I learned this when I was 3.
So you can do it.
you guys can do this.
No excuses.
Yeah.
No, zero. You guys should be masters by the time it's broken. I want to see socks, I want to see stars.
Yeah. We should have a
Let's
class.
see stars.
Well, the nice thing is once you get it all onto the one needle, you just switch it back and then you
My
start
sister
and
was
keep
like,
going.
"Mommy, they're gonna thrift, we're gonna learn, so.
I used to go thread.
Oh, you use this
The shorter or you didn't catch the
It's okay.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Alright.
I don't know how to, I'm sure she knows how to fix
Yeah.
Yeah. But we're not.
So should we, as you guys are doing this, should
We could keep
move on to
practicing.
this? You guys can practice as we're continuing our plans.
Okay, so the next station would have to do with Victory Gardens. And so one of the things that would happen is we would have to go back to those identities mentioned earlier. And in there, there's a mention about what kind of garden can you have. If you live in a city, you really don't have a front yard and a backyard typically to be able to use for a victory garden of any reasonable size. But there would be community gardens. If you live in a town, you might have a small yard, depending on the specifics you could use. But in schoolhouses like this one, you would also have school gardens, as well as the consolidated schools inside the cities. They would also have school gardens. And so depending on that situation, you would be told that, the people with this situation will have a certain amount of land, people with this other situation have another different amount. Typically, according to the United States School Garden Army, 10 by 30 feet would be the typical size that an average boy or girl can maintain for a victory garden. And we would actually refer to one of the pages from the manual from the same group in a handout. And what is really neat about the page is it goes through steps, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, to consider when making your own garden. And the activity would be to actually get graphing paper and use the little squares to represent a certain amount, like a square equals a foot, and students would then design what their garden would look like based on what we would go over using the information they would have had in hand at the time period. We could easily say, let's look at modern day advice for gardening, but once again, the whole point is to kind of look back into the past. We would actually use the manual given by the United States School Garden Army. And there's two of them. There's a spring and a fall one, and if it's springtime, we could decide to use that one. It would depend on what's most appropriate. And we would also have an actual little cup-sized planters for students to plant their little seed in so they can take it home with them. So kind of say hey, look, I can start my own modern-day victory garden. And so that would be the focus for that one. Also, I almost forgot to mention this, we have modern day calendars for harvest and planting because, if we want to encourage kids to start gardening, it's going to have to be a modern calendar. And so on this handout that has page 7 of the manual that I mentioned earlier, has the planting calendar for when you should probably plant your vegetables. In one of the previous handouts, you already had the harvesting calendar for when you more or less expect them to be ready for you to harvest. And so we would use that for students to also decide, when would you plant this, and kind of come up with a plan that they can take home. And if they do have a yard for a garden, they can even decide to, hey, Mom, Dad, let's make a garden. And so it's kind of something they can take home with them.
All right, so like we had said at the beginning is these were the 3 stations. What would happen is students would be split into 3 separate groups and they would take turns kind of rotating through each station. One of the biggest things that we had thought about when we created the station is they each get to take something home or take home a skill. Because knitting, not many kids, if you go into a modern classroom and say, how many people know how to knit? Maybe their grandparents do, but it's not a skill that they have. Even gardening, it helps to promote, being a little bit self-sufficient. They can go home and garden, knit something if they want to, so they can take these skills home with them. And then the only other thing was with the cooking. Some students have to cook for themselves depending on age groups. Even right now at home if both their parents are out working. So even though rationing, it's cool to learn about it back then, some students might learn something from it saying, hey, I only have this much in the refrigerator. How can I figure stuff out to make a meal? So all of these skills that we came up with, we wanted the students to be able to take home with them as skills. And then this goes into the next thing that I'm going to be covering, which is the learning lunch. So while students are eating their packed lunch, so they're going to bring lunches from home, the instructor is going to discuss what students during the time period that they're learning about, so World War I, what they would have packed and brought with them to school for lunch. So they're going to use those identities that I had passed out earlier to see who their person is. If it's a farmer, they might have more access to fresh vegetables and whatnot. And things that would be in a lunch depended on the season. So you would have to look at that harvest calendar to determine what vegetables or fruits would be harvested during that time frame. Some other things were chickens tend to lay fewer eggs in the heat and the cold, so maybe during those times eggs weren't easily available for them to take with for lunch. Even pigs are slaughtered in the fall, so salted pork might be more common in the fall versus other times of the year. This is orchard country, so apples were readily available. Bread, which would be made with those alternatives that we would have taught the students about, would be an easy thing to take to school because we know bread doesn't really go bad if it's too hot or too cold, so that's a good thing to bring with for lunch. But the big thing is, do you see a refrigerator in here? So, when packing a lunch, you have to think, is it stable if you don't refrigerate it? Sometimes the one good thing when it's cold outside is you see all of these windows. They can put their lunches by the windows because it's a little cooler by the windowsill. And then once it got a little bit closer to lunchtime, they could bring their pails closer to the stove where then they could be warmed up and then be ready for lunchtime. But I think the biggest thing is leftovers. One of the things that is preached is using every last bit. One of the articles even said if you have food left over and you're not going to use it, give it to the chickens. Because it was so important to use every last scrap. So the learning lunch activity would be the students taking their identities and taking the harvest calendars. And what you would do is you would assign a group of students or each student a time of year. So fall, spring, summer, winter. And you maybe have them think, okay, what would my person bring for lunch in the fall or the winter? It kind of gets them thinking once again with their identities, so it's following them throughout the whole program. And then on to our last thing after the learning lunch would be the debrief. You don't want to just set the students free and be like, okay, field trip over. You want to debrief, give the students first off a chance to just ask any questions because it was a really busy day for them. So it could either be getting the students back as a whole group or even just at their individual stations. Just have conversations in our lesson plan that we have here. We do have a Google Slides link that I'm going to share to Dr. Volke, so if anybody is interested in seeing it, we kind of outline our questions a little bit there. But it's basically, what did you learn at each station? Which station did you enjoy the most and why? Which activity do you think most helped the war effort? It just kind of gets the kids thinking a little bit before they head out. And then that takes us to our post-visit program, which is once the teacher's back in the classroom, they can further debrief and then some extension activities. So do you want to take on that?
So there are two main, I guess you say worksheets that we have developed for the post-visit. One of them is to think about the activities people would do to support the war effort, and that would be making propaganda posters to bring support to whatever activity that is. Maybe someone took gardening as their main thing. They would make a propaganda poster that focuses on getting people to use vegetable gardens, or victory gardens as they would be called. And there's also comparing and contrasting, making those connections. They got a chance to live through a day in school in this one-room schoolhouse. They've been, for many years, living in a modern 21st century school building with multiple classes and multiple teachers. Now that's their chance to really reflect. How is the life different and how is it similar? What would their life be like if they lived back then versus, today? And then there's also that hanging question right there. The 1914 to 1918, there was a war going on. And the U.S., even though for most of it didn't send any soldiers, how did that impact life in the United States? How did that impact what they ate? Even how they were in school? How did large-scale conflicts change lives of individuals. We usually think about the soldiers going to war, but what about the people who stayed home? What was going on with them? And in their case, students. How is the war impacting students? And so I think that would pretty much be a wrap up there of what the debriefing would be like. And that's it. Yeah.
There is one extra thing. So for you guys, I wanted to pass around a certificate that you guys can take home with you. And it just says that you were not tardy or absent from your one day here. From school during the school term of one day. So you guys feel free, I'm gonna pass it out, and you guys can write your name on that certificate and take it home with you. And as a fun fact, this is a copy of a certificate from 1916. I just blanked out the girl's name on it. So it is a copy of the original, from the schoolhouse. So write your name on it and take it home and have that as an accomplishment.
And that's it. Any questions? All right, 1950s.
Here's your certificate. I didn't get just enough for my printer.
I didn't get this.
There's for both of you guys.
I feel like I've accomplished something today.
So, hello there. Thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy schedule
one of my partners. I'm Laura Broadwater. My other two partners are Zoomies. So, Courtney, then, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Gemma. And I'm Courtney.
So, we've been working really hard on this project, and we're mainly focusing on the impact of education previous from 1940 to 1950, leading up into the actual education aspect into the 1950s, and the slowly weaning of the beautiful structure we're in, the schoolhouse, into more consolidated facilities. So, Jenna, you want to take it away?
Yes. So as Mara mentioned, we're focusing on what happened before the 1950s and into 1940s. So the impact of World War I and the baby boom was really influential on the 1950s. So after the soldiers returned home, they returned with very different America than they had left behind. So before the riots worked mainly at home, and then before the females left wherever they could, that was needed for the war effort, and then afterward they were sent back to their home to mainly make a home, take care of the children. So, and then older Americans who post-war marriage and childbirth due to the Great Depression and World War II were driven by the nation's returning war, weighing about that people just start families, and then that in turn impacted the baby boom. And then following World War II, the United States experienced a greatly elevated birth rate. The generation of baby boomers resulted in a strong post-war economy in which Americans felt confident they would be able to support a large number of children.
Yeah, so this ties into our pre-visit activity. So, like Jenna's saying, we're going in for the World War, baby boom, slowly getting go into education laws and stuff. And with our pre-visit activity, we actually developed an actual lesson plan behind it, so the teachers can use it. You know, if teachers are planning a field trip to the museum, they want to try to pull from all those different standards that they can, because, you know, the administration wants that information to provide the funding. So, as I walk around on the show, we have a brief little slideshow. We talk about World War II, returning home aspects, if y'all can see it. The GI Bill, so, you know, giving that money to our soldiers so they can go to further schooling, they can, you know, provide for their family better. We go into the baby boom, which, you know, increases that population because everybody's having children now at this time. We have impact of the baby boom and some factors that led up to it that really caused it to go into effect. And then we go into the call-in versus the Board of Education, and we deal with basically, you know, funding issues, who's going to pay for our education, we go into that. And then we go also into a little bit, which, you know, doesn't occur till in the 1950s, but we go a little bit into the Brown versus the Board of Education, since it's such an important element within history. And just kind of bring it all around then at the end of the presentation with where we are now. So bringing into the schoolhouse itself. So we talk about, you know, how at the time rural areas continued in the schoolhouse, and then they began to slowly consolidate to larger school districts. So, but within the schoolhouse, you know, 5 to 21-year-olds were in here, and about 30 students. They say about like different variations of supplies, teachers' roles, and then we just kind of bring it all around and to give a little taste of what they're going to experience within the schoolhouse. So that's kind of our pre-visit, going with what Jenna was saying with our history introduction.
So as Mara mentioned, we do have a pre-visit activity, and the grades that will be joining for this, grades that are most suited for this program are 6 through 8. So to prepare the students for their visit, they will go over the slideshow that Mara just showed everyone. And then
we accidentally jumped around. It's so hard, especially with us, but you know, we make do. So, but we also created a flyer. It was just for our Google Doc is crazy right now because everyone's trying to put everything in. So, but we did create a flyer to get the word out. It's just a little introduction to are you interested in what school was like in the 1950s, or will know of anybody who is. And then you just go on and say, we welcome you to a new program addition to the Little Red Schoolhouse in Shippensburg. Kind of gives a little information, what they'll be doing, history, impact, you know, the schoolhouse information itself. And then we provide, it's my email, of course, just if there's any further information with it. So I just wanted to throw that out there too.
So the objectives for this program, as a result of the previous activity, students will acquire background knowledge of historical events that have impacted education in the 1950s, and they can use an interactive whiteboard or other method of display for the computer content of the class, and then they'll probably be able to access the PowerPoint class. And then they'll be completing a worksheet after they are done.
So, yeah, for our assessment piece, we basically have just a simple, the assessment piece, we basically just have a little questioning, the impact, so it was the 1940 to 1950 education impact. So we just have some brief questioning, just to kind of do a little assessment piece on them. So, you know, they kind of want to know what year did World War II end. That was included. You know, what were women essential to the war efforts? You know, what was the GI Bill as 1950s approached the United States? What was the United States in need of? Who paid for education? What was the Brown versus Board of Education Act? And then how many students did schoolhouse teachers educate? Just simple questions to just kind of test their knowledge and assess them before the visiting the museum. So, you good, Jenna? Yeah, she's good. So, as I said, we have everything all laid out with our standard connections. So, for our actual program sequence, we also include the standards alignments in that as well. So, for each of the standard alignments, we actually created a space in our Google Doc where teachers can instantly go to. So, we have our standards for the pre-visit. We provide the standards for the actual program part of it, just a list. And of course, you know, the teacher can adapt it however they will choose. These are just some, you know, recommended ones. And we also have one for the post-visit, which we'll get to after the actual programming sequence. So, to begin the program, we want to set it outside. Students are outside, and if you want to begin any program that's an actual schoolhouse set program, you want to begin outside, you want to ring the bell, and you want to bring the students in. So, before we come inside, I really want to hit on the history of this lovely building. So, of course, you know, built, sorry about that. Yeah, 1856. 65?
1865.
Yeah, so, oh my gosh, it's right here. Sorry, I apologize. So, you know, it was located in Newburgh, and the owner was Stanley Myers. It was eventually donated to Shippensburg alumni and moved here. And a fun fact is actually, they took the whole building brick by brick apart and reconstructed it here. Many pieces within the building are actual pieces that were in the original, just, you know, remodeled. Then we slowly bring the students in, and we start to make comparisons with the interior of the building and what they would see in their consoles. So, you know, we would introduce the stove, because, you know, that's not a staple piece in the classroom anymore. I would hope some of them would know. I would hope. I mean, if not, then I don't know what's going on in the world. But we'd introduce, you know, the chalkboard, and this was the means of writing for the teacher. We don't have any smart boards at the time. The desks itself, you know, the water bucket in the corner where you put your drinks, and even the windows. So that's your heat. have to look the part and the teachers look the part. Which teachers of today still, dress to look the part. But, we have the male teachers who wore the professional attire, nice pants, a button-up, some little suit tops, tie. But the female teachers, it was seen to be wearing dresses, maybe a skirt, of course, had to go below the knee, and a nice blouse with it. So, same for the students. The boys would, they would wear kind of the same look, of course, and at the time, it wasn't seen as much, but slowly we start to see jeans come into the mix, and we see like overalls, and especially with the farm hands, a lot of the boys in the school were actual, worked on the farm. Females at the time wore dresses, but as I said, we slowly started to see that transition of the two-piece look. But of course, dresses were still the major norm. So then we go on and we show teacher roles. So at the time in the schoolhouse, the teacher did absolutely everything. They were not only just the teacher, they were the principal, they were the nurse, they were the playground supervisor, and whenever they decided to take trips, they would have to be the bus driver. So that was a point we would hit on, especially I'd have them thinking about, oh, well, what does my teacher do today within, the regular classrooms? Then we go on into punishments. So, I know many of us have heard before, one of the punishments that doesn't seem very bad when the teacher tells you to do it, but maybe after standing up there for about 10-15 minutes, you start to feel it. So, one of the main punishments they would maybe have a book, someone would have a piece of a trunk of a tree part, and maybe draw a circle in the board. And then you have to stand on your tippy toes and put your nose in the circle, and they can make you stand there for however long they want. That was one of the punishments. Possibility of writing on the board 100 times or even more, or however many the teacher really told you to, of saying, I will not talk in school, because you're disrupting the class. Then we go into some more brutal punishments, such as whipping with a hickory stick or even paddling. So, as we talk about punishments, which I feel like in that part of the program, many of them will be like, oh my goodness, thank goodness we didn't go to school back then. But we start to go into the scheduling. So, Mr. Edders, we have a lovely article from him. He goes really in depth about the different programs and subject lessons that were taught during the school. And of course, he was the last active teacher here before it's moved to here. So he said about around the time school would start around August 23rd, and then we would let out around May 9th. So, but you got here, school started at 9, you ran till 12, you got your recess, and then you ran to 1 to 4. But there was 2 other 50-minute recess periods in there as well, and then your lunchtime counted as your recess. If you wanted to eat, if you wanted to play, teachers, if you come in and you're hungry, the teacher's not really going to be like, well, you had your lunchtime, so it's not time to eat now. Some of the subjects that they taught were reading, English, arithmetic, geography, spelling, history, poetry, handwriting, health, drawing, and music. So those were some key points that we're going to make too. And then we go into supplies, because as you look around, it doesn't really look like we all have, like I said, smart board. We don't have, of course we have this up here, but that wouldn't be like that out back then. But we go into the more supplies, whether it be for the teachers, whether it be for the students. So for computers, they would not make their appearance till later on in the 1900s. But, so textbooks were all means of education. So, and also when it came to writing, we don't have number 2 pencils as you see on the desk. It first began as this, and you dip it into the ink, and you have to do it every now and then, like keep dipping back in, keep dipping back in. But we slowly start to see, within the 50s, an introduction of the fountain pen. So much better, don't have to dip every 2 seconds to keep myself writing. And of course, it starts to be a handy dandy ink replacement, stuff like that. Within, for writing and short things, I'm not going to move them at the time because I'm afraid the computer will fall and disaster will happen. For practice problems, they would write with slates. Sometimes even the teacher may have them come up to the chalkboard and write stuff if they may. But that would slowly make our way into supplies, and from supplies we go into the actual subject criteria of the program. So within your folders there is a few packets of covering of the sensory activities within the lessons. So to begin with, we're going to have our English lesson. So if you open it, the activity you see is, can anybody tell me what it is if you open up the book? I'm trying to set them up so it's actually like a book. But, yep, so one of the things that I've noticed, especially with a lot of the research we've done, is a lot of these sensory books from the 1950s, even some within the later 40s, they hit on a lot of like information that should be common sense to us, but there's a lot of kids nowadays that they don't know how to address an envelope. They don't know how to write a check. They don't know how. So one thing I noticed is they're using very logical stuff in this. So for this activity, students would be given a sheet, and on page 33 they would go through and they would begin to create the envelope using, they give you an example to go with, so the first one. And then after you do that, you can score your own work, and that's what the following page is. So that was kind of a brief little English thing. Now moving on, we have mathematics. So this is the actual mathematics book we pulled from. For this one we do a pictograph little lesson. And one of the things I really liked about this book that we actually had as an example, not only did it have the actual stuff in it, like this is an actual textbook for the student, we have the teacher's manual just right in the front. So I have all the answers to that worksheet right in here, and the teacher also guiding question. So they run through that, this is kind of a basic exercise to do. They're kind of looking at the graph, determining from the pictograph, going from there. So there's that. And then the next one, we have home living. Where are these books today? Because I feel like this could benefit a lot of school students nowadays, at least the ones that I've worked with. Don't want to call anybody out, but so this book, it goes through, when you go through it, it's basically adventures in home living, and it can talk about from how to keep your appearance nice, how to properly clean yourself, and even talks about child care, like basically babysitting. But the activities that I pulled that I thought was pretty interesting was how to adequately make your bed and do it in a way that is very satisfactory. So you have the folding of the bed, and which I learned this back in high school when I did a nursing thing, because I was almost had to go to nursing, but things change. But I learned that, so I do this, and it's kind of funny to see that, but I know so many people are just like, oh, the comforter's on, I'm good to go. So, but I thought that was an interesting thing, and they kind of just read about it, discuss it, and you can even have them take it home and try it themselves. So, the next little activities we have, as we said, with what Jenna was saying, within our program, we're doing 6th to 8th grade. So I found we have 2 language skill books, and I included them both in there. The red one is actually grade 6, and the green one is actually grade 8. So there's a little bit of a variation, but when you look over it, it's not too very far spread. So the activities in there deal with singular and plural nouns, and how to go about within your writing changing them. So it's kind of a thing, not only are they dealing with English in this aspect, they're also learning spelling, they're also learning how to their language skills in general. So I really liked that activity. I thought that was a nice one to pull. And also with the schools that come, with teachers would say, oh, I'm doing 6th grade. You can pull just that 6th grade activity. You don't have to apply those, but if they want it, go ahead. So then the last little lesson activity we have deals with geography. Geography and history were really big components in the schoolhouse lessons. For the one I pulled, it's interesting. I've read about the Greece a little bit, but not too much. And I think it's interesting how they talked about it. There's actually a whole Mediterranean unit in the book. This one basically goes into farming, and within our actual program sequence paper, I listed a few questions that you could ask. So as you're reading, you could be like, so what were the crops that was able to be grown in Greece? So what did the Greek farmers grow? Why were those selected crops chosen? What did they do with their olives? So there's different questions throughout there that they pulled. But that's mainly the lesson activities. So of course within the program, you can stop, have the students do them, further ask questions within our packet that we supply. It goes more in depth of what the actual program, museum, educator, whoever will be to the students really goes more in depth of what you can really do with that. So I also thought it would be nice to include a little bit of the teacher's perspective. So I pulled a teacher's guide for literature and a teacher's guide for social studies. This is more of the actual literature, reading stories, and then towards after the story, it presents some guiding questions. So, basically, what did you get from the story? What did you like? What did this character do? Just stuff like that. Which, that's how teacher's guides are today, but they go a little bit more in depth. This one is basically just a worksheet, and it has all the answers filled in. So this is like a worksheet book for students. I'm guessing they would be given this, it would be blank, of course, and then work through it. The teachers would grade it in this format. So that's more of like the actual lesson portions that we cover. I really wanted to throw the teachers in there because I want to try to present the program from not only the student perspective, the teacher perspective too. So let's move on. So then they go in, as we bring all the lessons into wrap, we go into lunches. So at the time of World War II, there begins to be an appearance of more processed foods. But luckily, being in the rural area that we're in, we didn't have as many options for processed food. We're still basically living with what we got. I mean, it's better now, but so for some typical lunches, you may see some meat, leftover biscuit, possibly a prepared sandwich made with homemade bread. You also would see some leftovers from lunch, but as within the lunches here, which I think Lexi and their group had said previously, there's no fridge in here. So you want to kind of be wise about what you're providing to have the students take to school. But lastly, we have outdoor activities. So as I stated before, there was basically 3 recesses a day. There was a lot of games that students played. So there would be the 2 50-minute recesses, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and of course your lunch one. So with that one, there was a lot of different games played. At the time, students were starting to actually have toys. So there'd be little gadgets and toys brought, and they would have hula hoops, they would have skipping ropes, they would play cards, hopscotch, they would even do right on the pavement out there with chalk. We'd have Ring Around the Rosie. And one of the games that I actually thought was pretty interesting is called Blind Man's Bluff. I never heard of it before. I did some further research for it, and it's basically a variation of tag, but you're blindfolded. Whoever is blindfolded. I can't imagine playing that. Luckily, where the schoolhouse was located at the time, we weren't all too close to roads. So, but I can't imagine here. I could just see one of the kids. No, I don't even know. From here, when we look at our sequencing of our program, so with a round of our sequencing, now we're going to go into more of the shifted consolidation issue. So my one group member, Courtney, is going to take us over.
Alright, so I'll be talking about shifted consolidated schools, how they started leaving out one-room schoolhouses and started moving all the kids into one school. So schools slowly started getting rid of the one-room schoolhouses and bringing all of their kids to a bigger school, some more closer to like a bigger town or bigger city, getting away from like the little farmhouses and the rural areas. So the students who were at the Mount Jackson School then but now the students were in mixed race schools, which became a positive. At the time, some people thought it might be negative because now they were going to school with students of a different race because they were from a different community. But then we found out that they slowly came to realize that that's a positive, and we came to embrace the differences of everyone in their school. So to move on to some of the effects on teachers, some negatives were they also had a longer commute to work rather than it just being right in their area. They would also have to travel miles and miles to get to their school where they're working. And one big one is that they felt that they had lost their sense of respect and power because in their one-room schoolhouse, they, as Mara said, like they were the teacher, the nurse, the janitor, like everything. But now in this consolidated school, they had to learn to work with other teachers within the school and other forms of staff that were within the school, and it wasn't just all on them, so they kind of started to lose their sense of respect and power that the students had at them. And they also had to stop once they achieved the grade level requirements. So say if they were like a 6th grade teacher, they had to get through the 6th grade curriculum and then stop there. They couldn't go on to 7th grade. But in the one-room schoolhouse, if a student was farther advanced than others, they could move they could be more flexible with the children as they were going through the grades. So some positives about the teachers moving to consolidated schools. There were more opportunities for teaching jobs because of moving all these students together. They could have bigger classes and possibly more teachers in the area. So more people that were interested in teaching could then go into teaching. And teachers had the opportunity to specialize in a particular discipline. So if they really wanted to be an art teacher now, they had the opportunity to just be an art teacher. They didn't have to be a teacher for all the general subjects. They could specialize with a particular discipline, which could help teachers really focus on what they really strived in and what they were the best at. And this also allowed for collaboration in a diverse teaching body, so not only were the students in a more diverse area, but the teachers were also immersed into that diversity. And the consolidated schools were a lot of times better buildings structurally, and the classrooms were often nicer because they were newer, or they took better care of them because they were new buildings and new schools that they wanted to make sure lasted a long time. So some other connections to present day that we would talk about during the program are some of the education laws that were not happening at that time, like during the 1940s and 50s, but are in effect now. And a big one that is IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So this deals with it's American legislation that ensures students with disability are provided with free appropriate public education. So that's the big one we would talk about, connecting the laws that we talk about in the previsit to laws that are happening now to kind of get that connection from then to now. And we would also talk about how some different school rules are different from what they were back then until what they are now. And we could talk about the dress code, how students now wear very different things, especially the students wear very different things. Some teachers will still wear dresses and trousers and a nice shirt, but a lot of students would wear different things now than what they did back in the 40s and 50s. And punishments are different now. You wouldn't get whipped with a hickory stick or paddled. You would get immediate detention or like an in-school suspension, those kinds of things. Hall behavior. In a one-room schoolhouse, there were no hallways that teachers had to monitor for the students to be disrupted, but nowadays, a lot of times there's hallway monitors, or you just have to know the different rules in the hallway. And same with cafeteria behavior. Once they started going to more consolidated schools, they started getting in cafeterias. So we would talk about the difference in the cafeteria things then versus now. And then for our conclusion
is closing. Sorry, Courtney, I just wanted to present these two around. Like, we wanted to present these two, so this is some of the pictures. These were from the Shippensburg Archives, their special collection. So these are all sources from there. On the back, I wrote a little snippet of some of the information that was provided. So, Reconstruction to here. This is Interchangeable Schoolhouse. And you know this one.
Yeah.
And now there's also I know it's 1943, but it's one of the classes there. And actually on the back of it has a list of the students and the teachers.
Yep.
So we would present that, have them like kind of look at that, so then it kind of brings it all around. So not only are you seeing the building before it got, renovated and moved here, also with the different class attire, you see all that stuff. And then when we go outside, we provided chalk. So I know this is colored chalk, but more fun. But colored chalk that they'd be allowed to do the sidewalks. I also provided a towel. Back then it was a handkerchief, but I just like a towel would work. And I have a bunch of these around the house, so I was like, I'll just give it. So they would, straighten it out, roll it up, and then become their handkerchiefs so they can play. But of course, teachers would have to watch because we don't want anyone going that way. But we have that. And then also, back then, since the cards were starting to become a big thing, we also have 2 decks of cards, and I printed off some instructions pulled from some sources. So one of the old card games was called Old Maid, and also Authors. So those were the ones kind of interesting. I kind of want to play them myself, but pretty interesting. I thought those would be nice to include. So then, as they're eating their lunch, they would get a little bit. Half the hour would be for lunch, the other half would be trying out the different games. But now, as we conclude, the agenda is going to go into the post visit activity.
Okay, so once the students are done with the program at the schoolhouse, they will return to the school as they have time to process and reflect on what they learned. And this lesson will provide students an opportunity to share the favorite parts of the program. So, as a result of the program, students will be given writing skills to craft a letter that describes their day in the 1950s. So the students will be provided a membership packet, and pens. There is normally like fountain pens that students can use if it's available with ink. And then they go through the packet with the students and have to practice their letters and words online. Paper provided with the packet. And then once they're done practicing, ask students to elaborate on favorite parts of the program and then write out a handwritten letter to a friend or a family member. And then once they all finish writing their letter, have a full class discussion in which students share their thoughts about the museum visit and program. And then once completed, collect the letters and review the students' use of proper penmanship and creative writing skills. Teachers can also check for correct spelling and grammar, and then after looking over the students' lesson letters and further assessing what they learned and enjoyed about the program, give the letters back to the students so that they may send them to the designated person if they would like to.
So the back pages they could use those, or if the teacher even wanted just to give them a blank piece of paper and have them try out. I always think it's funny to watch because you see the cursive start going sideways up, So that would be fun, but I don't know if you guys caught the end there. We thought of this activity, and I was like, wow, this actually kind of connects to one of the lessons that we did in class with the envelope, because if we get the letter back and they actually want to send it, say if they made it to their grandparents who live in, like, let's say Florida, and they want to send it, they'll actually get to practice their writing, filling out an envelope. So I thought that was a good way to bring that around and have them pull from further information there. But so yeah, that's our closing, and with our penmanship, it was extremely important back then for them to learn. They were only allowed to write in cursive with their penmanship, so there was a lot of practice with that as well. But so that concludes the program. Is there any questions?
Thank you, all of you, for coming, and student groups to come and start taking advantage of what we can offer in the future in the schoolhouse once we finish the structural work that needs to take place. So, let me or Dr. Deidre Board know if you have any questions or any thoughts or suggestions. We're just getting the ball rolling now and starting to line up options and possibilities.
Yeah, we're super excited, so thank you all very, very much for coming. As all of the books that you saw that were used in the various presentations, those are all in the collection of the Little Red Schoolhouse. When we came in here in January, we discovered, I think, 1,100, what's Alex's exact number?
1,018.
1,018 books that we're just kind of have been collecting in here to date all the way back to the 1810s. So we have quite a collection that we're very excited about being used. So thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. I won't hold you up. 2 hours is enough. Good job, guys.